Welcome to exercise 8. In this exercise, we'll be using Ansible to set up a new server. So first things first, we want to be sure we have multiple servers. So I would run Vagrant global status. Global status. Right, so I have this server. I would create a new Vagrant machine and use Ansible to be able to install certain applications and set up that specific server. So for now, let me shut this one down. Okay, so let me just create a new server. So I'm spinning up a new Vagrant machine. And then I would use an Ansible file, YAML file, to be able to install applications and set up a new machine entirely. So this might be a few minutes. All right, so this has been created. Now we have two servers. So I'm going to use server 1 to set up server 2. So I'll go back to server 1. So I'm going to go to server 1. Server 1 is this. So Vagrant SSH, and I'll SSH into server 1. Now Ansible does not require that you should, when you're using Ansible, it doesn't require you to install the Ansible as a client on the target machines. The target in this case for me is server 2. So I already have server 1. I want you to set up server 2. You can have as many servers as possible. So I need to know the IP address of server 2. I'm not sure I have it, so let's quickly find out what the IP address is. So I can do Vagrant SSH. So I want to go into server 2. So this is the IP address. So I'll just copy this somewhere. All right. Okay, so you will see how some things can be automated using Ansible. Now I can exit this. So I will log back into server 1 or SSH into server 1. Okay. And then the first thing you want to do is to install Python. So you can run sudo apt install Python 3. I believe it's Python 3. It's already installed. Okay, so you can actually just check if it exists. So this is Python 3, Python, I think it's Python 3-v. Oops, that's the wrong command. So it's supposed to be, so the correct command is Python 3 then hyphen version. So it shows you what version of Python that you have installed. The next thing after this is to install Ansible. So we'd run sudo apt install Ansible. Right, so this is going to install all of the modules. Yes. So this might take a couple of minutes depending on the speed of your internet and the speed of the VM as well. Right, so now that Ansible has been installed, the next thing we want to do is to allow server 1 to communicate with server 2. We need to generate an SSH key, which server 1 will use to connect to server 2. So we're generating an SSH key in server 1, and then we'll copy it to server 2. For the ease of switching, I'll open a new tab in my terminal and just zoom in so that I can log into server 2 as well, just to make things slightly easy. I'll just run the global status again. Okay, so this is server 2. So Vagrant SSH. I'm just logging into server 2. So this is quite similar to what we did before when you generate SSH keys. You need to generate an SSH key and copy it to the target machine. And you already know that by default, if you generate the key and you try to copy it without first modifying the SSH config of the target machine, you may not be able to connect. Now the case is different when it comes to platforms like DigitalOcean and some other platforms like GCP and Azure or AWS. You might be able to just generate the key, put it on the server, and it should allow you to connect, because there's a chance that when you created a droplet, for example, in DigitalOcean, it automatically allows that connection, password connection. So first we'll try it with Vagrant Machines, then we'll also try it with DigitalOcean. So the first thing we want to do here, we're currently in server 2. So this is server 2. Yeah, this is server 2. So let's change let me set the host's name. Server 2, so server.server2.local. Okay. This is the static name, and it has to be run with sudo. Okay. Let me give it the transient name, and let me give it the pretty name, server 2 Vagrant. Okay, so I'm checking the host name again. So now I can see that it is set. This is the pretty name. This is a more user-friendly name that is displayed. So for example, if you're connecting via FTP, you might come across this name. So that's what these commands are doing. Different distributions have different names. Debian, for example, you don't necessarily have to do this. You can just set only the static name, that's it. But you can also set this as well, right? So this is done. The next thing is to edit the SSH config to allow password authentication. So we'll say sudo nano etc ssh sshd underscore config, right? So we'll just go down to, I think it's line 52. Is it 52? No, 58. Yes, line 58. So we'll set password authentication to yes, and then we save this, exit, and then restart the service. So sudo systemctl restart sshd. All right, so the service has been restarted. Now let's generate our SSH key. So SSH key gen. This is in, well, now I'm switched back to server 1. So I'll just press enter, generate the keys. That's done. And now I'll copy the key to server 2. So I'll say SSH copy ID dash I. I'm copying the default key, so I don't need to specify any other parameters. So this is Vagrant at, let's try to use the host name, server2.server.local. Okay, so it could not resolve it. So let's just use the IP address for now. There's something we need to set. We also need to install Avahi daemon for that to work. So let's even do this. So let's just use the IP address because we'll have to do it on both. But I want to show you but I want to show you how to automate that kind of installation as well using Ansible. So let me just run the SSH copy ID again. This at the IP address which we copied before. Okay, right, yes, and it's asking for the password, so it's Vagrant. All right, so it has been copied. So if I run Vagrant SSH to Vagrant at the IP address, sorry, not Vagrant SSH, pardon me, SSH. All right, so now we're in server 2. So this is perfect. So I'll just exit. Now I'm back to server 1. So at least we're now sure that you can connect via IP address to server 2. So this is server 2. Okay, so yep. Now the next thing is for Ansible. Ansible uses what is called a hosts file or hosts inventory file. In this host inventory file, this is where you would store the different IP addresses, host names that you want to use whenever you're trying to automate something. And the host file, the inventory file, it stores all of those things, and then you now have what they call an Ansible playbook. So the Ansible playbook is a YAML file that contains the set of instructions that you want to perform remotely on that server. So let's try to organize things a bit. The first thing we want to do is let's just create a folder called Ansible and enter the folder, and okay, so now that we're inside this folder, the next thing we want to do is we want to create our host inventory. All right, so we could just call it inventory or something. So we could say nano inventory. Right, so this is our inventory file. So the next thing is we want to add the target machines into this inventory file. We already know the IP address of server 2, so let's add the IP address. The IP address is 96. Okay, so this is the IP address. Now you can group IP addresses. So for example, you can say let's say you have a group of servers that have like all of the web applications. So I can say web apps. For example, I can have a group of servers called web apps, and then you have all of the IP addresses for them. So this could be this could be this. Okay, you could have another group of servers again that is database servers. These are all of the database servers. So these two could have their own IP address. Okay, so you could have this in your inventory, right? So that when you're trying to target them, you can then specify a specific machine from your inventory or a group of machines in the inventory. So the next thing we want to do is so I'll just remove this for now and just leave only this. So I'll save. All right, so now that we've saved this, the next thing we want to do is let's create our playbook file. Okay, so we'll do nano, let's call it setup.yml. So this is our file where we will be storing all of the commands that we want to run inside of our playbook. That's for the target machines. All right, so let's assume that the first thing we want to do is to say install Apache. We want to install Apache. So or want to install NetTools, for example. Let's use that for an example. We want to install NetTools. So the first line here will be the delimiter like this. Then you go to the next line, you put 1 hyphen, you leave a space, and then you type name. So this name here can be anything. It's just like a subject for you to understand what that particular block is. So I'll just call this setup networking tools. I'll just call it something like this. All right, then go to the next line and make sure that all of this aligns. So in your hosts, we're targeting that machine. So I'll just leave this as all. If you're targeting a specific machine, you would specify, say if it was a group, for example, you would specify web, like we did web apps before. You would specify web apps, so it knows that when it's checking the inventory file, all of the IP addresses and the host names under the group web apps will be targeted, right? But here we are just doing everything inside of that file because we only have one IP address. The next thing is now for Vagrant, and this is a give or take thing, because on Vagrant, the way it's executing some of the commands, if you don't run them as sudo, it would return a permissions denied error. So there are 2 flags that you can possibly add. So the first thing you want to add is become, and then you set it as true, and then you add the become method, then you set it to sudo. So what this is going to do is become a sudo user. and then what type of sudo method should you use. So we're adding the sudo command, so that whenever you're trying to run any of the, whenever you're trying to set a task here, it's going to run it as a sudo user instead of just running the command just like that, and then you start to have permissions errors. All right, so this is for this one. So now we want to set up a task. So a task basically is the set of things you actually want the playbook to execute, right? So leave 2 spaces. So you see, when you go to the next line, then you leave another line, and then you go to the third. So just go to the third line and then leave 2 spaces, and then you say tasks. The next line, as usual, everything needs to stay in line. You need to be mindful of how you're writing these things. So name, the name of this task is to install ifconfig. Right, the next task, we want to install it. What package manager are we using? We're using apt. For Ubuntu or Debian family operating systems, you use apt. For RHEL, you use yum. So that will be CentOS. The RHEL, I think OpenSUSE uses yum as well. So we're using apt. So you set it to apt, and then next line, then you indent it again, spaces. So you add name. The name is called net-tools. Make sure that this name matches what is in the repository. If it doesn't match, it will return an error that it cannot find this package. So for example, if I did this, it will return an error because there's probably nothing like net-tools with a double S. So the same thing applies. If it's Apache, for example, you would write Apache 2 because it's apt repository. If it is a RHEL repository, it would be HTTPD. So take note of that when you are setting up your tasks. Then the next thing is the state. So what does the state mean here? The state here is we're checking if net-tools is present. That's what the state is doing. So it checks if net-tools is present. It's going to stop. It will not even proceed with the rest of the commands. If it is not present, then it will install the net. It will proceed and install the net-tools. If we set it to absent, it means we're trying to tell it to remove that package. So it will remove the net-tools command package from the operating system. This is for this. The next thing is, so that's pretty much it actually. So we can save this, and then we can exit. So exit this. Now the next thing we want to do is to so now let's test our playbook. So we'll say Ansible -playbook. Our file is called setup.yml, and then we specify what inventory we're using. Now if you don't specify the inventory, so there's something about Ansible when it installs. If you're installing from the apt repository, I think it's expecting the inventory. It will automatically go and check this directory. It will automatically go and check this directory for the inventory file. So if it doesn't find it there, if it doesn't find it in this inventory, in this place, it will throw an error. That's if you don't specify this. This I here just means inventory if you don't specify it. So we're specifying it, so we don't need this guy again. We're specifying the inventory. I think we already named it inventory. All right, you can give it whatever name you want to give it to. So we're specifying this, And if you want to test before you execute the actual command, I recommend that you add the check flag. The reason is that if there's an error in your playbook, if there's a problem with the commands you have done in your playbook, you don't want a situation where, sorry about that, you don't want a situation where it goes ahead and does something on the server without you knowing, and then something goes wrong along the line. So you want a situation where you are sure that your playbook executes properly. So you can just add the check flag and then run it. So now it's executing everything. As you can see, it said okay, which means that it was able to connect to it, and it said changed, which means that it was able to do the task inside it, which is to install ifconfig. And then this recap just tells you what has happened on the server. That is using the check command. So now we can execute it proper by removing the check command. So now it will install this and we'll wait for it. Should be done shortly. It will just take a few minutes depending on internet speed. All right, so now it is done. It has finished executing it, and we can check if it's actually worked. So let's switch back. Let me switch to server 2 and let me run ifconfig. There, so it worked just fine. So that's how you can automate stuff with Ansible. So you can go ahead and actually add multiple tasks to your Ansible playbook file and run them on a server. Now, if you want to use a platform like DigitalOcean, the process is practically like the same. Okay, so let's do that. So I'll open up my browser. All right, so let's log on to DigitalOcean. So let me log on. All right, so I have logged on to DigitalOcean. I have a sample project here, so let's go ahead and create a droplet. So get started. Something that you should note, like some of these regions sometimes can attract extra costs. Some might be more expensive than the other. So whenever you're choosing like a droplet, obviously this wherever center you're using is dependent on where you're actually targeting. So if you're creating a droplet for people in the Middle East, for example, you might want to use something that is around Europe or Asia, you know, something around that region. So for now, I'll pick Germany. I'll pick Germany or Amsterdam. So let's just pick, I'll just pick anyone too. Ubuntu, yeah, let's use Ubuntu 20.04. You can pick anyone. Then let's use, let me use the, isn't available in a data center. So let me choose something smaller. Let's see. All right, so this works. All right, so I picked New York, then basic here, and then regular with SSD. That chose the one of $4 a month. So we're going to use an SSH key. All right, so we'll click on add SSH key. So we already generated an SSH key on server one. So we'll just use the same SSH key, but this time we'll manually copy it. So I'll just cut the file. Sorry, dot ssh id underscore rsa dot pub. It's the public key that we need. So copy this and we switch back here to DigitalOcean. Just name this server one Vagrant, something like this. You can see there's already a guide here on how to generate the SSH key and then copy it and paste it here. Be mindful when you are copying and pasting the SSH key. If you make an error, so for example, if while copying and now copy it up to here, that's a problem. That key will not work. So you need to be mindful when you're copying your SSH keys. Right, so add this, that's there. And yeah, I think that's all I want to add presently. Let's give this a different host name. So I would say, let me just call this ULC, or let me say alt school dash Ansible. Right. So I'll say create droplets. So this is going to take a few minutes or so to set up. As you can see from here, it's setting it up, so this might take a while. So all right, so now this has been created. So we need this IP address, so copy this. Let's copy the IP address. Let's go to our Ansible inventory. And I'll just remove this one and paste that one in there. Save. Now let's just try something. Let's try to use the same task as before. But let's add a check command. So it's asking, so I'll say yes. It's asking if I want to connect, right? So I'll say yes. All right, yes, there's something we forgot to do. All right, so there was something we forgot to do before, and that was to specify what user we want to use to connect, because as you can see from here, it's trying to use a Vagrant user with the IP address, which this user doesn't actually exist on that remote DigitalOcean droplet. So we need to go back to our YAML file. So we're going to our YAML file, and then we're going to specify the user we want to use. We can actually remove all of this, so we don't need this one because we'll be running it as a root user there. So you say remote underscore user is root. While running all of these commands, the task is going to run as a root user. That's the reason why we removed that become user and become key, become method and become key. That's the reason why we removed both of them. Now, if we were running as root, we don't need any of those. But if we're running it as any other type of user that is not a root user, then there's a chance that you will need those two keys. That's setting become to true and then become method. So we can save this, exit, and now let's run our playbook again with the check flag. Right, so it's running, and it should work now. Nice. So it actually connected. As you can see, it has actually connected. Now it's trying to install the ifconfig, and it says changed. So it says OK 2. So this passed and this also passed. So if you run it again without the check command, then everything should run perfectly well. So I hope this has been able to explain how to use Ansible to be able to automate tasks on your servers on a remote machine. So this is almost done. It's installing, and there, it's done. So we can even SSH into this machine right now from here. So I'll copy this and I'll say SSH. Let's try to SSH into it. Root at. Okay, so there, it has actually SSH'd into it. Okay, as you can see from here, we're now inside our DigitalOcean droplet. Now let's run that ifconfig. There you go. So this is these are the adapters on the DigitalOcean droplet. So you see, everything works just fine.